So for more on the Biden administration's response to the crisis, we want to bring in Ed O'Keefe. He's at the White House. Ed, good morning.
Biden spoke out on the situation at the Al-Shifa Hospital that Ramey was just showing us, and his administration continues to stress that active negotiations are underway to win the release of hostages being held in Gaza.
The hospital must be protected.
President Biden's calls for Israel to protect the main Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza come as Israel claims a Hamas command sits below its main medical complex.
And it's my hope and expectation that there will be less intrusive action relative to the hospital.
Political pressure on the president to rein in Israel is mounting. Protests around the world. And in the Oval Office Monday, the president of Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country, appealed to President Biden to stop the violence in Gaza. Meanwhile, U.S. officials continue negotiating for the release of what's believed to be about 240 hostages held by Hamas since its early October raid into Israel.
This is a top priority for President Biden.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met late Monday with the families of some hostages, even as he admits they're still uncertain if or how many American hostages are still alive.
We won't know for certain until we actually get the release of those hostages and they're safely returned to their families.
Early this morning, the remains of 5 U.S. service members killed in a weekend training exercise in Cyprus returned to U.S. soil, including Army Staff Sergeants Tanner Groan, Andrew Southard, Cade Wolf, and Chief Warrant Officers Stephen Dwyer and Shane Barnes. They were deployed for any possible evacuations of Americans from Israel or Lebanon and are the first U.S. military deaths related to the Israel-Hamas war. Now, today, a large pro-Israel rally will be held here in Washington on the National Mall. It comes as the president's getting ready to leave for California, where other foreign policy challenges await. He's scheduled to meet with President Xi of China on Wednesday and Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Friday at what is expected to dominate the rest of his week, the focus there on the Pacific Rim. Anne-Marie?
Ed, I just want to ask you again about the hostages. You know, the U.S. obviously isn't negotiating directly with Hamas or directly with any of the parties. So what is the role of the U.S. when it comes to negotiating the release of these hostages?
Oh, it's certainly a party to them, Anne-Marie, since so many Americans are believed to be among the roughly 240 still being held. A guy named Brett McGurk, who's the president's senior advisor on Middle East policy, is in Europe and the Middle East this week, meeting with various leaders as they sort out how exactly they can get these hostages freed. McGurk is someone very well known to Israeli and Arab leaders across the region, and so by sending him, it's actually a signal that perhaps things are moving along at a pace suggesting there could be resolution on this in the coming days. The fact also that the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met last night with some of the family members of these hostages suggests maybe they've got some information to share with them, or they're preparing them for some kind of resolution in the coming days.
All right. And so let me ask you about the APEC summit. And of course, the president is expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. We've talked about this before. This has been sort of a long runway of all these other kind of people from the Biden administration going to China, speaking with their counterparts. First, I actually want to ask you what's on the agenda, but also why all of the pre-meetings? I think that people need to understand by the time these two leaders meet, there's a clear understanding of where they both stand on very key issues because of all the stuff that's been happening before.
Precisely. That's why you've seen the secretaries of state, Treasury, Commerce meet with their counterparts either in China or over here in the United States. But the one who hasn't had a meeting yet with his counterpart is the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, who's been trying to reestablish communications with the head of Chinese military. So it's expected that will be a main sticking point and topic of conversation for the two leaders when they meet on Wednesday. Other things could include the ongoing push to figure out how to deal with artificial intelligence going forward. The U.S. and China co-signed an international agreement in London a few days ago. That's a good sign that at least on this issue they may be willing to work together. They'll talk about Taiwan. They'll talk about the various provocations in the South China Sea. They'll talk about fentanyl potentially and how China exports a chemical used to develop that opioid to cartels that then, of course, sell it here in the United States. Big concern that China may be allowing that to happen. And then China's also concerned that the U.S. is trying to so-called decouple from the Chinese economy or essentially establish an economic system separate of them. The president has said that's not the case. He just wants to make sure the Chinese are playing by international rules. we'll see how far they get on that conversation. Anne-Marie.
Ed, thank you very much.